The rain hadn't touched the deck in days, yet Elias Dray felt soaked, not with water, but with the sweat of old nightmares. Salt clung to his skin like guilt. Somewhere below deck, wood creaked like bones breaking, and the scent of gunpowder still clung to the sails. He had left the Crown's navy behind, abandoned their orders, betrayed their laws, but not for gold, not even for freedom. He did it for a promise, a single moment of mercy that ended in fire. That night, the flames didn't just take the ship, they took his crew and the only brother he'd ever known. Years later, the whispers still follow him. The fire wasn't the curse, it was the price. They say the jungle on Isla de Yedra was silent, but Elias knew better. Some islands hum with insects, others with ghosts. And now, as he gripped a blade dulled by salt and memory and stared at a mark burned into flesh long healed, one question clawed its way to the surface. If saving a life cost you everything, would you still do it? Blackbeard once told him. Every pirate earns a shadow, but only a few ever learn who's holding the lantern. Elias never forgot that. This is one of those pirate stories the sea tries to bury, but some things refuse to stay drowned. Welcome to the channel The Pirate's Diary. If tales of pirates, lost oaths and cursed gold stir something in you, the sea keeps its stories, but only for those who dare to remember. Will you join the crew? Subscribe and step aboard. A mark on the skin, a scar in the soul. The sand was still red when Elias dropped to his knees. It wasn't his blood, not yet, but the scent of it clung to him like salt. His boots sank into the damp earth of Fort Cadaver, once a smuggler's haven, now a butchered memory. Smoke curled up from charred sails and blackened bones, rising slow into the sky like the souls of the men he couldn't save. Behind him, the wind carried no birdsong, only the rattle of dying breaths and the distant echo of cannon fire swallowed by the sea. Someone had spoken, someone inside his own crew, and now half of them lay scattered like broken teeth across the fort's ruins, limbs twisted, faces frozen in pain or disbelief. Some still gripped their weapons, others had never drawn them. Elias stood slowly, blood soaking into the leather of his coat. His left hand trembled, not from fear, from rage. He didn't mourn the gold lost to the ambush, he mourned the silence after. They didn't scream when they died, he whispered, staring at the body of his quartermaster. It was like they already knew. They had trusted him, followed him, and he had led them straight into betrayal. Only 6 men survived the massacre, if they could be called that. One was missing an eye, another had lost half his fingers. The youngest, Mateo, sat clutching a burnt locket to his chest, whispering a name that didn't belong to the sea. Elias had no answers for them, only a direction. He unfolded the scorched scrap of parchment once hidden beneath his belt, the symbol still etched in ash, a coiled serpent wrapped around a black sun. No Spanish map bore it, no sailor claimed to know it, but he had seen it before, carved into a stone deep within Isla de Yedra, a cursed place, untouched by flags, unmarked by charts, the kind of place smugglers warned each other about in drunken slurs. The jungle eats what it sees, Blackbeard once told him, long ago, when Elias was still young and hungry and foolish. But it never chews. Some things stay, alive in there, but they ain't men anymore. Elias hadn't believed him then, but now, standing among corpses and betrayal, he felt that warning echo in his ribs like thunder before a storm. The sail cracked above as they limped from the coast. Wounded men groaned below deck. Mateo wouldn't speak anymore, only stared, only rocked. And in the distance, as the island shrank behind them, something in the trees moved against the wind. At night, the crew muttered prayers, not to God, but to the dead. They spoke of eyes in the leaves, shadows that didn't blink, and once, just once, Elias thought he saw a shape walking across the waves, slow, human, but not. A smear of salt across the horizon that vanished when he blinked. He didn't wake the others. He didn't want to know who else saw it. They made landfall 3 days later. Isla de Yedra greeted them with silence. No birds, no crabs, just wind-rustling leaves that didn't move, just heat, heavy heat, and something watching. They didn't build a camp. They dug shallow holes for the dead. No words, no crosses, just sand. "Mark the graves," said Diego, the last man who still looked Elias in the eyes. "No," Elias answered. "If something finds us, let it wonder if we're already ghosts." That night, the jungle whispered. It didn't sound like leaves. It sounded like names. Their names. By morning, one man was gone. No blood, no footprints, just a pile of teeth wrapped in a strip of his own shirt. Mateo wept quietly, hands pressed to his ears. Elias didn't speak. He only pressed the parchment tighter against his chest, like a relic, like a curse. Because the truth was carved in his mind now. The symbol wasn't a map. It was a warning. And whatever had betrayed them back at Fort Cadaver, it hadn't stayed behind. Blood in the sand, ghosts in the wind. Blackbeard's voice came back to him like a memory soaked in rum and sorrow. The worst stories don't start with greed. They start with trust. And trust, Elias now knew, had a taste, like ash on the tongue, like iron in the mouth, like silence where a voice used to be. Mud clung to their boots like rot. Each step sank deeper into the breathless hush of the jungle. The trees closed around them, thick with moss and shadow, and the sun was nothing more than a fading memory above the canopy. They didn't speak, not out of discipline, out of fear. Even the wounded, dragging limbs wrapped in bloodied cloth bit back their pain. The sound of suffering had no place here. Not in a place that listened. Fionn, once the loudest voice on the halberd's rest, marched tight-lipped behind Elias, eyes twitching with every creak of branch and rustle of unseen wings. The Irishman had cursed through storms and laughed over graves. Now, even he wouldn't meet Elias's gaze. Signs began to appear, too deliberate to be nature's chaos. Branches broken and stacked like arrows, feathers bound in clusters with hair, small stones painted black, placed in circles, waiting like warnings. Or invitations. "Don't touch them," muttered Diego. No one had tried. Then came the scent, not rot, not fire, something sweeter, but heavy, like incense burnt for the dead. Elias raised a hand, and they slowed to a halt. The jungle shifted before them, not with wind, but with intent. The trees seemed to inhale, and then it opened. Figures stepped through the green like ghosts from the soil. They were barefoot, silent, cloaked in paint and silence. Their weapons were not made of iron, but bone and stone. Spears wrapped in sinew, eyes sharp as obsidian. There were no war cries, no roars, just stillness that made every breath feel too loud. Then one stepped forward, a woman, her skin wrinkled like driftwood, her hair gray as mist, but her presence was thunder, calm, ancient, unblinking. She carried no weapon, she didn't need one. Her gaze pierced through Elias like he wasn't flesh, but memory. She lifted her hand and sniffed the air once, slowly. "Why do you wear his scent?" She asked, her voice dry and calm, like stone rolling over stone. Elias furrowed his brow. "Whose?" "The sea-wolf," she answered, "the one with the burning beard." The air dropped cold. Fionn took a step back. Diego whispered a prayer. Elias didn't move. He couldn't. Blackbeard. He hadn't spoken that name aloud since the fire, since the wreck, since the curse Elias still carried in silence. The pact they made, the lives they took, the one they left behind. He'd thought this place was beyond Blackbeard's shadow. He was wrong. The old woman stepped closer, not to threaten, to see. Her fingers brushed his chest, just once, just above the heart, then pulled back like she'd touched something still burning. "The mark is not on your skin," she said, "but the sea remembers, and so do we." Behind her, the silent warriors didn't blink, didn't breathe, only watched. Elias swallowed hard. "I'm not here for gold," he said, voice low, cracked. "No," the woman replied, "you're here for a thing the sea never gives." He didn't ask what, he already knew. Redemption. But redemption, he'd learned, always came with a price, and sometimes a body count. The jungle held its breath again. The woman turned, made a gesture. Without a word, the warriors parted, creating a path that vanished into green shadow. Elias looked to his men. Their faces were hollowed by fear and hunger, but they nodded. He stepped forward into the path carved by the silent, and behind him, the jungle closed like a mouth swallowing secrets whole. Somewhere deep ahead, beyond totems and ash, the past waited, not as a memory, but as something alive. "You wear his scent," the woman had said. And now Elias understood. It wasn't just Blackbeard's shadow that followed him. It was the pact, the curse, and the brotherhood no man could run from. The fire cracked in silence, casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the earth. No one sat near it, not even the tribe. It wasn't meant for warmth, only for truth. Elias stood alone before the flames, his hands stiff and filthy, jaw clenched to hide the tremor in his voice. The old woman had spoken, and now the silence around him was louder than cannon fire. "You walk paths sealed by fire," she had warned, eyes glinting like obsidian wet with storm. "This island remembers. It marked you long before your ship ever touched its shore." He wanted to argue, say that he had no past here, but the look in her face, hollow and certain, told him it wasn't about where he'd been, it was about what he carried. The jungle didn't care for names, it cared for weight, and Elias, he carried plenty. The tribe offered no food, no rest, no blessing, only a choice, cold and absolute. Leave before sunrise through the cursed pass, or stay and vanish like the others. No one asked what vanish meant. They all knew. The trees were too quiet, the ground too hungry, and the stars refused to shine above Isla de Yedra. Even the moon kept her distance. Elias tried to keep calm when he asked the woman what they meant by the cursed pass. Her answer came like a blade pressed to the soul. "The river knows. It feeds on fear." Behind her, the warriors stood still, painted, barefoot, watching like statues that could bleed. He nodded. He lied. To his men, Elias spoke like a captain, calm, measured. "There's a way out," he said, "but we have to move before the sun breaks." They believed him. Even Fionn, who limped with a bone-deep wound and still looked too. Elias like a brother. Even Matteo, who barely spoke anymore but followed him with quiet trust. They packed in silence. They followed his lead. None of them asked about the price, because Elias hadn't told them. He had stood before the old woman alone and heard the true toll of the cursed pass. It demanded a soul, one life, willingly given, not blood, not battle, surrender. One step into the riverbed, one name swallowed by the stones, and the rest would pass untouched. A trade. "The stones don't want the guilty," she'd told him, touching the dirt with her palm. "They want the loyal." That night, Elias sat apart from the others, sharpening his dagger with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. He stared at each face. Diego, Fionn, Matteo, the last of them, each one broken in body but still hoping, still trusting him. And that was the curse, because loyalty was the easiest thing to betray and the hardest thing to kill. The jungle stirred around them like something breathing, thick, wet, alive. Far off, the river whispered, not with water but with voices, soft, familiar. Elias didn't sleep, he just watched the fire die, and when it did, he made his choice. The bargain wasn't just death, it was memory. To silence the stones, the woman had said, "You must give it someone it will miss." He gripped the blade tighter and waited for dawn. The river wasn't made of water. It slithered like oil between roots and stone, dark as the spaces between stars. The path carved through it, like a wound, narrow and coiled, lined with thorns that dripped sap the color of old blood. Every step sank with a sickening squelch, and the sound of boots on mud echoed like bones snapping beneath the surface. No one spoke. No one dared. Above them, the cliffs moaned with voices that weren't theirs, chants in no known tongue, rising and falling in waves like breath from a sleeping beast. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere. No mouths moved, no lips parted, yet the words were there, sharp and wet and wrong. Elias led, his hand always near his blade, though he doubted steel could help here. Each step was heavier, not from exhaustion but from memory. The air grew thick with it, the heat of old choices, the weight of names long buried. The jungle leaned in close, vines brushing skin like fingers, leaves brushing ears like secrets. And then the whispers began, not in a language, in names. Callahan, Lena. Rowan, names no one else should know. Names Elias had never spoken aloud. Names pulled from the locked places in his mind, the dark corners of his soul where blood still pooled. He said nothing. He just kept walking. Behind him, Fionn stopped, eyes wide, breath caught. "There," he muttered. "There, in the trees." His pistol cracked. The shot echoed like thunder through the foliage. But when the smoke cleared, nothing. Just leaves, just vines. Then the air shifted, as if the shot had broken something old, something sleeping. That's when the screams began. Gareth, the carpenter, dropped his hammer and fell to his knees, sobbing a name. "Maribel! Maribel!" Rocking like a child. He didn't have a daughter. Never had. Thomas, who hadn't prayed in 20 years, collapsed into the mud, weeping, muttering fragments of forgotten psalms, hands shaking like he'd seen something crawling beneath his own skin. Fionn backed away, face pale, gun useless now. "I saw her," he whispered. "She was right there. I saw her face, in the tree." Elias didn't turn. He couldn't, because he too had seen something, not a ghost, not a creature, but a shadow wearing his brother's smile, the one he left behind, the one Blackbeard had told him to forget. "Mercy kills slower than steel," the captain once said. "It follows, like rot in the bone." And now it followed here, in a place where memories bled and shadows remembered. Still, Elias walked. Not because he was brave, but because he had to. Because stopping meant looking, and looking meant breaking. The vines grew thicker, the path thinner. Behind him, footsteps faltered. One man turned back, another dropped and didn't rise. But Elias moved forward, step by step, toward a place where the river curled like a noose around the mountain's heart. A place the old woman had called the mouth of the island. The jungle didn't want their bodies, it wanted their past. And Elias had too much of it. "Shadows that bleed don't die," Blackbeard had once warned him over a bottle gone dry. "They wait for the ones who gave them shape." Now Elias understood, and still he walked. The fog didn't roll in. It crept, curling low around their boots like smoke from an unseen fire. It swallowed the trees first, then the men. The jungle disappeared in pieces, the path vanishing beneath a pale, choking veil. By the time the last vine vanished, they were alone in it. No sky, no ground, only damp silence and the sound of their own breathing. Then came the voice. It didn't rise. It unfolded, slow and slick, from somewhere just behind Elias's left ear, a tone both familiar and foreign, the kind that pressed cold fingers to the base of your spine. "Mercy is a luxury, Captain." He froze, muscles locked. "Did you think they'd forget?" Elias turned fast, hand on his blade. Nothing, just fog. But then, through the shifting grey, a shape began to form. Taller than the trees, darker than the mist, walking as if the fog parted for him. Blackbeard, his coat dry, his boots clean, no sweat, no breath, no shadow, only fire in his eyes, not the kind that gives warmth, but the kind that consumes. Elias's breath caught. This wasn't memory, it wasn't madness, it was him. The man who had pulled him from the wreck all those years ago, who gave him a sword and a second life. The man who taught him to fight, to lie, to survive, and to bury regret beneath layers of salt and blood. "You carry ghosts like chains, Elias." Blackbeard's voice was calm, controlled. It didn't rise, but it pierced. "You want to be free?" he asked, tilting his head slightly as if amused. "Then leave one behind." Elias tried to speak, tried to ask who, but his voice, stolen, stuck in his throat like seawater in a drowning man. His hand trembled, his mouth opened. Nothing. The fog swirled, and when he blinked, Blackbeard was gone. Only the silence remained, heavier than before, but something had shifted. Deep in Elias's chest, beneath ribs and bone and rot, a name clawed its way upward. Not one of the dead, not one of the fallen. No, this name breathed, it pulsed, it betrayed. Elias didn't whisper it, didn't speak it aloud, but it sat there, sharp and waiting, at the edge of his thoughts, glowing like a wound that never closed. The traitor, one of them, still walking beside him, still pretending, and in the distance, somewhere beyond the fog, the jungle exhaled. Not in wind, but in laughter, low, hollow, endless. Elias clenched his fists, not from fear, from clarity. Someone had to be left behind. The island would demand it. And this time, mercy would not come. The river ran red beneath the canopy, not with blood, but with rust and something older. Its current moved slow, like breath from a dying throat. The trees leaned close, as if listening, watching. By the time Elias reached its edge, one man was missing, Alvaro, the quartermaster, loyal, quiet, always just out of sight. The man who knew the maps, the stores, the secrets. Gone. Elias felt it in his bones before he saw it. That tightening in the gut, that taste of metal on the tongue, the kind of knowing that comes not from reason, but from scars. They searched in silence, steps slow, ears sharp. It was Mateo who pointed first, to the far bank, where the fog had lifted just enough to reveal two shapes. Alvaro stood in the open, whispering. His hands moved fast, nervous. Across the river stood a man in a Spanish officer's coat, shadows masking his face. The two never touched, but something passed between them. Glints of metal, the weight of betrayal. Elias stepped forward, his boots sank into the mud. Alvaro turned, startled, eyes wide, mouth already moving. "Capitan, I was only trying to—" Elias didn't lower the flintlock. Alvaro's face twisted, part fear, part pleading. "You don't understand," he said. "They were coming. I had no choice. We're dead either way, Elias. I just wanted to live." "Then you should have stayed with us," Elias said, voice hollow. "They promised safety, shelter. You think you're saving us, you're leading us into a grave." Behind Elias, the others emerged, Diego, Fionn, even Gareth limping, face pale. They heard every word. Elias didn't blink. Alvaro's eyes darted to them. He dropped to his knees. "Please," he whispered. "I didn't want this. I didn't mean for them to die. I just wanted peace." Elias stood silent. Peace. It echoed in his mind like a cruel joke. There was no peace left. Not in this jungle, not in this life. Just choices. Hard, ugly, final. Blackbeard's voice echoed again. From the past, from the fog, from whatever place he now haunted. You want to be free, leave one behind. Mercy. Or justice. Alvaro reached for him, tears in his eyes, hands empty. Elias pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like lightning. Alvaro's body jerked once, then crumpled into the river's edge, half in mud, half in memory. No one spoke, not even the jungle. The Spanish officer across the bank was already gone. Only the river remained, carrying the body, slowly away, folding it into the current. Elias lowered the pistol. Let that be the last lie among us, he said. But he knew better. Ghosts don't die with traitors. They multiply. The shot hadn't yet faded when the trees came alive. One by one, the painted figures stepped from the jungle, silent as dusk, eyes reflecting the last of the firelight, spears lowered, faces unreadable. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The river had heard, and it had answered. The water, still moments before, began to churn, not with wind, not with tide, with hunger. A low thrumming rose from the depths, like a drumbeat beneath bone. The surface rippled in circles, slow and wide, as if something old had turned in its sleep. The old woman appeared at Elias's side, her bare feet unmoved by mud or blood. She didn't look at the corpse drifting downriver. She looked at him. "You have paid," she said, voice soft as ash. "Now go." No blessing, no forgiveness. Just the cold exchange of debt. Behind her, the tribe gestured toward the shore, where canoes waited. Long, narrow things carved from trees that had long since died. Their surfaces were smooth, but stained with something darker than age. No one asked what. The crew obeyed without words. They moved like shadows now, leaner, quieter, carved thin by fear and fire. Mateo helped Fionn into a canoe. Gareth murmured something too soft to catch, fingers brushing the edge of a totem as if asking permission. Elias stepped in last. The wood creaked. Beneath his weight, the current took them fast. Too fast. No paddles, no steering, only surrender. The jungle slid by in green silence, and the river deepened into black. Trees vanished. Light dimmed. All sound became water and breath. One man clutched his chest and whispered a prayer, old and broken. Another wept without sound. Then, without warning, a figure at the back slipped. Just a foot, a sudden lurch. He hit the water with a splash and was gone. No shout, no struggle, just a hand, a ripple. Then silence. No one moved to save him. The canoe rocked once, then steadied. The others stared forward, eyes wide, mouths tight, because they all knew. The river didn't return what it claimed. Elias gripped the edge of the canoe, knuckles white. The wind had stopped. The air was thick as pitch. He leaned forward, peering into the water, and it looked back. Not a reflection, a shape, a face, a flicker of knowing. His own eyes mirrored in something far below, and beneath them, others, dozens, hundreds, faces stretched and silent, mouths frozen open, watching, not with anger, not with pity, with recognition. Elias swallowed hard. This wasn't passage, it was judgment. Each second dragged like a blade down the spine. The air tasted of copper. The fog returned, swirling low, hissing between the canoes like breath from a dying god. He thought of Blackbeard then, of the night they burned the slave ship, of the screams, of the silence that followed. "The sea doesn't forget, Elias," he had said. "It just waits for you to remember." The river was like that, not a place, a memory, a wound with no end. And as it pulled them deeper into the dark, Elias realized something he hadn't before. The toll hadn't ended with Alvaro. It had only just begun. Dawn rose slow and bitter, not golden but purple, like a bruise blooming across the sky. The canoes scraped against gravel, not sand, not stone, something between. A shore that felt untouched by time, or perhaps forgotten by it. They stepped out one by one, their legs shaking, faces pale. Salt clung to their skin like a second layer of death. Only half of them remained. No one spoke, not to ask who was gone, not to say the names aloud, because the names had already been taken, swallowed by the river, carved into the current like cuts in flesh. Elias dropped to his knees. The ground was warm, dry, too still. He pressed his palms to it, half expecting it to breathe. It didn't. The others collapsed nearby, not with relief, but with surrender, eyes open, staring at nothing. Not one man wept, not one dared. The waves hissed behind them, slow and steady. And that was all. No birds, no wind, no sound but the breath of the sea. The jungle, the island had vanished into the fog, as if it had never existed. But Elias knew better. He didn't feel lighter. He felt emptied, not like a man who had escaped, but like a bottle drained of its last drop. The curse hasn't followed. He told himself that, repeated it like a prayer. But even prayers turn sour when spoken too many times, because something had followed. It wasn't the jungle, it wasn't the fog. It was colder, quieter, inside. He could feel it behind his ribs. Not pain, but presence, a weight that didn't press. It watched. The others shifted restlessly in their silence. Fionn coughed blood into the sand. Matteo traced invisible symbols with his finger, eyes blank. Gareth stared at the sky as if expecting it to split. No one looked at Elias, but he felt them, waiting for orders, for answers, for hope. He had none to give. His thoughts drifted back to the fire, to the traitor, to the sacrifice, to the moment he saw Blackbeard standing in the mist, untouched and eternal. Leave one behind. Elias had. He'd left many, but he now understood the truth. The curse was never in the island. It was in the choice, in the man who survives, and in what he must carry. Some ghosts follow you home, Blackbeard once said on a night filled with too much rum and too many regrets. Others wait there, wearing your face. Elias didn't speak. He simply stood, turned toward the sea, and listened. The wind began to rise. The fog didn't chase them. It circled, waiting for when they'd return. Because no one leaves a place like that, not really. They just bring it with them. The last flame died on a beach no map remembered. There, in the pale morning hush, a scrap of parchment curled in the embers. Blackened edges, wax melted into the shape of a seal that no longer held meaning. Smoke rose like a ghost with no face, carrying words that no one would ever read, a letter never sent, a truth never spoken. Elias sat with the ashes still warm beside him, the sea whispering at his back. He hadn't moved in hours, just watched the fire die, inch by inch, like a man watching himself fade from the world. The others slept, what was left of them, scattered across the dunes like shipwrecked thoughts. No dreams, just the shallow breath of survivors who'd lost too much to sleep deeply. Above, the stars had begun to vanish, but Elias didn't look at the light. He looked at the smoke. He remembered every name it carried, every hand that had held a rope or drawn a blade or whispered a promise they didn't live long enough to break. Faces blurred by time, but never gone, and in the shadows behind the last dying spark, he was there. Blackbeard, arms crossed, silent as the sea, not flesh, not ghost, just presence. Elias didn't flinch. "You warned me," he said. At last, voice low, cracking like old wood. Blackbeard didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched. Elias reached into his coat, pulled free a compass with no needle. It hadn't worked since the river, since Alvaro, since the bargain no man should have to make. He placed it on the sand beside the ashes, a grave marker for something that was never buried properly. The man he used to be. "I chose justice," Elias whispered, "or maybe revenge. I can't tell the difference anymore." His eyes burned, not from smoke, but from what he saw when he closed them. Mateo, rocking in silence. Gareth, who wouldn't speak since the fog. Fionn, coughing up pieces of himself like the jungle still lived in his lungs. None of them blamed him. That was the worst part, because he had become the thing he once swore to fight, the man who made the call and lived with what it cost. Not redeemed, not damned, just adrift. The tide licked at the shore, gentle, mocking. Elias stood, but not to leave. He looked at the ocean, the way one looks at an old wound, not healed, just forgotten long enough to hurt again. Behind him, the others stirred. They would rebuild or rot, but they would follow him still, and that, too, was a weight. Blackbeard's voice finally came, as if carried by the wind itself. "Now you know, the sea never forgets." Elias nodded. He didn't need forgiveness, just enough silence to carry the truth a little farther. The fog was gone now. The jungle behind them vanished like a bad dream. But something remained in Elias's chest, a current that never stopped pulling, a name still unspoken, a choice still unanswered, a letter he would write again and again, only to burn it each time, because some stories were never meant for land, some confessions are too heavy for paper. Did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been standing on that cursed shore, would you have pulled the trigger? What other pirate stories deserve to be remembered before the sea swallows them for good? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the Pirate's Diary and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten. The waves will keep whispering, whether we listen or not.